Once. Welcome to today's webinar of post-COVID care or post-COVID syndrome, post-COVID complications. They call long COVID, long haulers, lot of other terminologies there. So we are here to discuss the road ahead with the post-COVID issues. So with me are three panelists. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Maheshwarappa, Head of Rehabilitation at the Sakrawad Hospital. Dr. Sandeep, Interventional Pulmonologist, BGS Global Gleneagles Hospital. Dr. Shashi Kumar, Internal Medicine Consultant, Senior Consultant at Suguna Hospital, Bangalore. Welcome to all of you, sir. Thanks a lot for taking out time and joining this meeting. So I would like to thank Dr. Sandeep because he's been on a weekend camp with the villages, attending the patients there, educating them about the COVID and the post-COVID things, and he's traveling and he's joined this meeting. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. I should have reached here, but unfortunately we left a bit late. I'm sorry for that.
No issues. Body ache, myalgia, severe body ache, to the moderate complaints like breathlessness, severe cough, to the extent of chronic fatigue, too much of fatigue they complain of, then myocardial infarctions, strokes, myocarditis, a few cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis, all have been reported. So it's a wide complaints with the post-COVID issue. That's the reason we thought to discuss the road ahead with the post-COVID issue. Dr. Sandeep, could you please share your experience? He's been working with the COVID patients from past more than 1 year. So Dr. Sandeep, could you please share your experience with the post-COVID issues?
See, post-COVID is definitely an issue. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, yes.
So, see, how long is the post-COVID period depends upon the severity of injury at the time of infection. Okay. So the milder the injury, the earlier will be the recovery.
Okay.
As our experience is concerned, we have seen close to around 3,000 to 3,500 patients in the past 1.5 years. And surprisingly, none of them is following up with us with some or the other issues. Okay. According to me, if at all, I have to say, recovery is a rule in COVID. There is no doubt about it. How long the individual is going to take to recover completely depends upon the initial injury. Okay. So what we can do is the most reassuring thing what we can do is we can tell the patient that he will settle over a period of time. That is the first thing. The second thing is minor symptoms here and there need to be attended, and they have to be consoled, and they have to be treated for those things. I think should I go on telling everything, or should we will I get the questions in the future as well regarding this, regarding the symptomatic management? Hello,
yes sir.
Did you hear me?
I'll come up with the questions also.
Yeah.
A brief this thing about your experience with the post-COVID care.
That is what I told. No, see, post-COVID care involves majority of the time it is the residual fatigue. As you said rightly, fatigue is something which is going to be persistent. Majority of the individual. And it is same in all viral infections. See, if you take dengue, most of the people will take slightly longer duration than usual to recover completely from fatigue. Okay, let us take this as a post-viral fatigue only rather than any special thing associated with COVID. See, fatigue involves that great feeling of fatigue. For that, I would suggest what to say adequate gradually pacing up their activities. Rather, see, people are in a hurry to resume back to their normalcy. That is something which they have to consider to avoid. See, gradual pacing of their activity is something which will give them more confidence. That is first thing. And here and there are two cases where we have used, and all those things in few of the individuals. That is one thing. Second most important is cough and mucus production. See, there is an injury of the respiratory tract, okay, at various levels. At the tracheal level also injury. At the bronchial level also there is injury. Even at the alveolar level is also even at the alveolar level there is injury. They have injuries at various levels, and once the patient starts recovering, the receptor, the goblet cells, the nerve endings, those glucosa which were what to say disrupted at the time of infection and inflammation start to regenerate. Okay? Most of the cough, whatever is persistent in the post-COVID era, is either due to organizing pneumonia, that is post-viral, or due to tracheobronchitis. Okay, and I would again say this also is a process of healing. In the process of healing, there are few symptoms which disturb the individual. Okay, in such a situation, we can manage either with systemic steroids if there is obvious organizing pneumonia on an X-ray or a CT scan, which is done at if there is no evidence of organizing pneumonia, if it is tracheobronchitis, simple inhaled corticosteroids in the form of either MDI or a DPI, that is a meter dose inhaler or a dry powder inhaler, should suffice for this cough and mucus production. The third most important symptom, what we come across, sore throat also. There are so many people who continue to have sore throat beyond their recovery from COVID. And we suggest only either SOS paracetamol if it is troubling them severely, or simple salt water gargling for on, 2 times or 2 to 3 times per day till that sore throat goes away. See, these are the 3-4 common symptoms which we have come across. And this is how we are tackling them. But majority of them settle over a period of time. The most important thing in COVID is anxiety. Okay, most of the people are anxious about their symptoms, and we as treating physicians should be, should reassure them that everything is a process of healing and everything will settle over a period of time. As for these are the common symptoms which we see at OPD level. Okay, when it comes to these MIs, these strokes, these Guillain-Barré disease, see, they are there, but they are very, very uncommon. Okay, here and there, one single case report, 2-3 case reports should not make us think about those complications. Anyway, these all these MIs and all, we are keeping the patient on anticoagulants for 1 month post recovery. That will avoid the DVT as well as myocardial infarction and other ischemic complications. As far as the Guillain-Barré syndrome is concerned, we have not seen any GB syndrome as such in our hospital out of 3,500 to 4,000 patients. I think the other speakers can add if they are, if they have any other, if they have experienced anything like that. Hello?
Okay, Dr. Sandeep.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, this thing?
Yeah, it was breaking, that's why.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Okay. So basically from past 1 year in your OPDs, pulmonology OPD, you have not come across any post-COVID patients coming back after 4 to 6 weeks or even 3 months with any issue.
There are hardly, I can count 1 or 2 or 3 patients who have come to me after 3 to 6 months post-COVID.
Okay. From the first wave, I mean.
From the first wave. So I have, we have been convinced that the complete cure is a rule in COVID. Okay. Once they come out of COVID, that is what the time might differ, but eventually none of them is following up with us with the so-called post-viral fibrosis requiring transplant or long-term oxygen.
Experience with post-COVID issues. Being a physician, you are in day in and day out, you will be seeing a lot of OPDs and this thing. So you are taking care of COVID patients also from past 1 year. So your experience with that, Shashi?
See, post-COVID symptoms, definitely there are significant what we feel, because what we are seeing, there are so many patients which we are seeing earlier coming for follow-up. Commonest thing what we see is, what I have seen is anosmia, loss of smell or taste. Other thing is persisting cough, fatigue. Some people complain of dyspnea. I had 2 or 3 patients with vascular. One, the just after discharge, next day had a stroke, fog level, this thing. One patient who had a MI.
Okay.
Okay, some 2-3 patients in hospital had an MI and died. Yeah. So the
Okay.
persisting symptoms of dyspnea and breathlessness, we had 2-3 patients. The
Okay.
CT done at 2 months, they are persisting this thing. We used,
Mhm.
I think, antifibrotics also. As Dr. Sandeep said, over a period of time, their oxygen requirement, everything will going to improve. Other common symptoms we see is anxiety. People come with a lot of anxiety. And other thing is the tachycardia, which I have observed a lot, and some unexplained giddiness and dry throat. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah.
Mangesh, you were not, you were muted.
Dr. Maheshwarappa, sir, your this thing experience with the rehab portion from the first wave, how many patients you have come across and your experience, sir?
So ours is a more of inpatient and outpatient care, the rehabilitation. And last 1.5 years, we are seeing quite a
Yes, sir.
good number of patients coming. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What happens is the patients which we are admitting are they are a little more sick. They need intensive inpatient rehabilitation program. So we saw when patient acute complication in the beginning, during admission, we have seen patient developing a cardiac events, then stroke and pneumothorax, secondary infections, and severe musculoskeletal pains. These are all common in the beginning. So, of course, as a sequelae, we see a lot of the weight loss and fatigue, endurance. But some of the patients which are referred with COVID are like mentioned, um, that Guillain-Barré syndrome. Right now, I have 3 patients with Guillain-Barré's and
Okay.
two hypoxic injury due to cardiac arrest.
Okay.
I have right now admitted.
Yeah.
So, and some of the patients with polymyositis,
Yes, sir.
critical illness polyneuropathy.
Okay.
These are the patients we admit. And
Okay.
some patients, at least 3 patients we have with amputation gangrene.
Okay. Okay.
These are since the rehab takes, we go for a more of complicated cases. So we come across with these patients and one patient with, as I said, transverse myelitis, high levels.
Okay. Sir, is it in the acute COVID period itself or is it after 4 to 6 weeks you have seen the Guillain-Barré and the transverse myelitis?
It's a more of acute phase only.
Acute
So
phase
whatever
only.
we received are within the first 6 weeks only.
Okay. Okay, sir. The stroke patients, sir, they are coming for the rehab programs, post-COVID strokes.
Yes, we do admitted quite a good
Okay.
number of patients stroke. But the fact is, when patient develops stroke and they check for COVID and they become positive, and they decide that is the
It's exactly.
and
Yes, sir.
sometime after patients with the COVID diagnosed also develops a stroke.
Okay.
Those who
Okay.
are not on anticoagulant develop thromboembolic, and those who are already with on anticoagulant, high anticoagulant, they develop a bleed, and we have patient admitted with bleed after intracerebral bleed.
So in our ICU, actually, with the COVID ICU, we have around 15 to 20 patients and at least 4 to 5 stroke post-COVID. More than 4, they are staying with us for more than 4 weeks now. And they are presented now with the strokes. Especially the post-vaccine, 2 cases were post-vaccine induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia. Their platelets used to be 9,000, 10,000. But eventually they developed hemiplegia and 2 of them went for a decompressive cranectomy also. Okay. Dr. Shashi, your experience? Hello? Hello? Dr. Shashi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you're audible now. Previously,
Okay.
your question I was unable to understand, not able to hear.
Hello. Yeah, neurological. Yeah, being a physician,
Hello.
the neurological post-COVID issues, what you've seen.
post-COVID issues. No, I didn't
Yeah.
get your question.
No, being the internal medicine, this thing, post-COVID neuro cases, what all you have seen, your experience with that?
Neuro cases, that's what one. Strokes.
Okay,
Okay, other thing is seizures.
okay,
Okay. These
Okay.
two we have seen. Only one
Mhm.
patient we saw with Guillain-Barré.
okay,
One patient. So it was referred
Okay.
finally to NIMHANS in your financial list. These three cases post-COVID
Okay.
we have seen. One
okay,
GBS seizures we have seen.
okay, okay.
Maybe 4 or 5 seizures patients we have seen. They are
Mhm.
in the immediate period, not after 4 weeks. We have seen in maybe in the end of second week or in the third week we have seen
Okay.
discharged and readmitted with seizures. Strokes we have seen. So many, as sir said,
Okay.
they come back to the hospital with stroke. When we do the test, either PCR or antibody, they will come positive.
Yes,
Only
exactly.
one patient post-discharge, we had one stroke.
Okay, okay,
These three, mainly one patient had, we did an MR angiogram also, but we couldn't identify any clot. We did 24 hours later.
okay. Okay, Dr. Sandeep? Hello?
Yeah, tell me.
Yeah, what percentage of the hospitalized cases you think will come with the pulmonary fibrosis in the post-COVID this thing?
See, that is what, see, fibrosis is a mode of healing. There is a lot of chaos happening with this pulmonary fibrosis thing. See, the thing
Okay.
is, we are not bothered about the extent of fibrosis on CT scan. As long as it is not compromising the oxygenation, I would not consider it to be significant at all. If you consider this way, I think most of them are maintaining a saturation of above 95, 96. And whoever is hovering between 90 to 94, if you give them time, eventually, that is what I told. No, there is none of our patient who is following up with us, who is on long-term oxygen therapy post-COVID.
Okay, okay. You don't have
Okay,
discharges
50,000.
on oxygen concentrators?
I didn't get it. Hello?
No, there are no patients whom you have discharged on oxygen concentrators and they have not
that's
got
what- see,
back.
Discharging from the hospital within 2 to 3 weeks, once the whoever has stayed in the hospital for a slightly longer duration of time is happening. But they don't continue to remain on oxygen after 3 months or after 6 months is what I meant.
Okay,
The
okay,
majority of the people who are on 2 to 3 liters of oxygen have been discharged on oxygen concentrators to their homes, putting them on basic steroids and anticoagulants, and most of them have come back to us after
Okay.
1 month, who after with the improved saturation. Okay,
Okay,
majority of them we have stopped oxygen within a month or a maximum of 2 months or so. Okay, that is why. See,
okay,
that is why I meant there are no long-term post-COVID issues related to fibrosis. See, immediate actually in this particular episode, whatever is there, the patient is having, who has stayed in the hospital or who has stayed in the ICU for a longer duration of time, they are the ones who will be discharged on oxygen concentrator, and they have usually turned to be off oxygen after a month or 2. That is what I meant.
Sir, into one. The patient who had severe COVID. Hello.
yeah. It's Shish. Hello.
Yeah, no, we had some patients who became chronic post acute phase. They were in the hospital for more than a month with a significant lung injury. What we saw was over a period of time, they progressed in the form of muscle weakness, finally going on ventilator and developing in sepsis.
Okay.
So these people, the initial acute phase settled down. There are people who become fibrotic and they won't respond. Maybe the people who are moderate disease patients, over a period of time, their lung improves to the extent where they are independent of oxygenation. Still, they have some mild effort dyspnea, those things. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, so CT scan done at 2 months also, maybe CT scan findings will not correlate.
Yeah, do you think post-COVID issues?
Hello?
Hello? The CT scan findings won't correlate with the clinical findings.
That is what, sir. See, the thing is, any radiological resolution, it is written in the books.
It takes long time.
6 to 12 weeks. 6 to 12 weeks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sir. But
Yeah, yeah.
So any radiological resolution, it is written clearly in the books of what to say, as old as our that X-ray book. I forgot his name. It will take 6 to 12 weeks. So
Yeah,
there is no point in what to say assessing an individual's lung injury at the end of 2 months at all. Because we don't, it entirely depends upon the gas exchange. If the gas exchange is fine, if he's maintaining a saturation of 96 and above and he's still feeling breathless, then it is the muscle which is at dysfunction rather than the gas exchange happening at the lung. So if the saturation is fine even after walking for 6 minutes or maybe after performing minimal exercise, so that clearly tells that the gas exchange which is happening at the lung level is good. Whatever that sensation of dyspnea he is getting probably could be due to his muscle weakness or maybe a possibility of a central nervous system component might be there. And 2 months is very early to assess the injury after discharge, because any radiological resolution will at least take 6 to 12 weeks. So at least 3 to 6 months is the period at which we have to look and assess for the fibrosis and the long-term complication of an individual who had a severe pneumonia or maybe a score of 15 or 20 at the time of admission in this particular episode. So I feel, yes, as I totally agree, there are some people who continue to require oxygen for a slightly longer duration of time, but none of them in our experience is on long-term oxygen therapy. Long-term oxygen therapy, I mean that he continues to be on oxygen till he is alive. In that sense, I tell.
Okay, Dr. Maheshwarappa, your experience, sir, with as a respiratory therapist and the patient on chronic oxygen dependency?
Yeah. Whichever patients I treated, most of them, by the time they got discharged, they are out of oxygen. Even with 25 out of 25 involvement shifted for
Okay.
rehab, they came out from oxygen. Especially at least
Okay.
during 24 hours bedside monitoring without any physical exertion, they are out. Majority, most of the patients. I say almost 100 out of 100 patients. Of course, some patients died because of sudden pneumothorax,
Okay.
but most of the patients recovered even with when they came to hospital with a BiPAP machine, 15 liter of oxygen. It
Okay.
gradually tapered off and stopped. So
Okay.
our patient stays nearly about a month to 6 weeks.
Okay.
That's one.
Yeah,
Yes.
this second wave, we are seeing the subcutaneous emphysema,
Yes,
pneumothorax, more injury than the
Pneumomediastinum.
first wave.
that is true.
Yes, sir.
No,
Yes.
even first wave also we had.
You had, sir? Okay. Okay. So your this thing with chronic fatigue, myalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgia, body aches, what is the rehab protocol you follow in those kind of patients? Do patients with those complaints come to you?
That is true. Most of the patients will have fatigue and
Okay.
tiredness. And these patients definitely have the huge the demand of oxygen, muscle wasting, secondary effect.
Sarcopenia.
So
Okay.
they and pain and nutritional deficiency, there are multiple things adds to this morbidity and
Yeah.
disabilities.
Yeah.
So we have to have a comprehensive program for these patients,
Okay.
including from initial assessment and then by different professionals in the rehabilitation, from pulmonologists to and
Okay.
the rehab doctors and the
Okay.
psychiatrists, together with the physiotherapist, occupational therapist, the speech, swallowing therapist, rehab nurse exclusively were trained to take care of patients with these things. And the
Okay.
comprehensive approach definitely makes patient to recover better.
Okay. Okay. So any experience with age and gender related this thing, Dr. Shashi and Dr. Sandeep?
I mean, it is a proven thing that it is majority of the time who are males are severely affected. They are the ones who are more in the ICU level.
Okay.
I think there is no particular what to say. Again, it depends upon the extent of injury at the time of the infection and inflammation. That is what I would like to say. If you ask me any particular sex predilection, I would still go with males being more affected even in the post recovery period as well as compared to females.
Okay. Dr. Shashi, being a physician, you will be encountering lot of patients with chest pains, chronic fatigue syndrome, myocardial infarction. So what is your this thing on that? And commonly asked questions from most of them is post-COVID recovery, when they can start exercising, and how aggressively can they start vigorous exercise, when they can start, because a lot of young patients who are COVID positive, even with mild symptoms, have succumbed after vigorous exercise. So after that, patients are asking about when to start exercising, and whether it has to be slow or can they go ahead with the vigorous exercises. You have to unmute, Shashi. Shashi, unmute.
Yeah. See, it
Yeah.
depends upon the pre-existing condition, what are the risks, whether the patient has a pre-existing cardiac disease or whether he has a risk factors for the cardiac disease, the form of family or any dyslipidemia, hypertension or diabetes. And the other thing is whether the severity of COVID also matters here. One is the hypercoagulable state is seen most in the first 2 to 4 weeks. Then onwards it is less. But no markers are helpful to detect who will going to develop, who will not going to develop. So general rule is in any COVID, because there is a fatigue also, start with the slow exercise, for a graded manner and increase it. Time duration, difficult to specify. I feel with the mild disease with no comorbidities, no risk factors, they can resume their work by 4 weeks.
Okay.
Those with who has comorbidities as well as with the pre-existing cardiac conditions, I think they have to go to the rehabilitation program, assess the cardiac functional status, and in the graded way they have to increase that. In a patient who has mild disease, no risk factors, I think they can work by 4 weeks. Other place can say.
Okay.
Earlier we have seen whenever they do little exercise also it worsens. Something similar to chronic.
Okay.
So during those times they need a rest. If they don't have a fit, gradually they can increase their exercise.
Okay. Your experience with new onset autoimmune diseases, any experience with new onset autoimmune diseases? Dr. Maheshwarappa, you also?
You mean to say with COVID patients?
Post-COVID, yes, sir.
Post-COVID with already those who have autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis patients who developed COVID, and since they are already immunosuppressant, the inflammatory reaction is not much, and they have recovered well. So other inflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases, I have not seen.
Maybe Bhagesh, we have seen some patients with thrombocytopenia in the ICU unexplained.
So your voice is breaking.
Hello.
Yes. Okay. Shashi, your experience with autoimmune? Post-COVID,
we have not
anybody
seen
has come
any.
with the new onset rheumatoid arthritis and all?
No, new onset rheumatoid arthritis. No, see, this all rheumatological markers can be false positive in any viral infections. Something like your lupus anticoagulant being positive and with the prolongation of APTT. And we see thrombocytopenia, there are various causes, heparin we are using right and left. So that could be the invisible factors. Maybe that is the only thing we have seen is the thrombocytopenia unexplained. Whether it's related to heparin or related to autoimmune is other thing. People come with multiple joint pains associated with swelling. What we can call them as reactive polyarthritis.
Okay.
The only thing which we have seen that can be called more as a post-viral reactive arthritis rather than calling as a autoimmune itself.
Okay.
We need more time. Maybe when these people are followed for long years, we know whether they develop any rheumatological autoimmune diseases.
Okay. What about the GI symptoms patients come with?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who come with nausea, particularly they are unable to eat. The other what commonly we have seen is loose motions. So many people complains of loose motions, even during the acute phase, even during the recovery phase. But majority settle with probiotics, with antiemetics. And other thing we suggest is ask them to have a small meals, frequent meals. Okay, not to lie down for
Okay.
2 hours. Majority settle
Okay.
down.
Okay. Dr. Sandeep,
Yeah.
you're there? Yeah. Sir,
Yeah, I'm there.
your experience with secondary infections in the hospital and post discharge.
Yeah, surprising.
Most of the patients are on antibiotics. What is your experience with the secondary
infections are also very. That is what. See, we have seen here and there few secondary infection, but as
Okay.
compared to influenza virus, whatever we had seen 2009, the
Mhm.
the rate of secondary infections in COVID pneumonia as such per se is very less, but still it is possible. Usually it starts in the somewhere at the end of second week, or there are some people who come with bacterial sinusitis later. I think sinusitis is something which we recently had. Who
Mhm.
had bacterial sinusitis? We did a biopsy, nasal endoscopy and all those things. Turned out to be bacterial sinusitis. That is what
Mhm.
any patient who comes to us with fever, again relapse of fever, or any new onset symptoms with a gap of maybe a week or so, with who during that time he was normal, and again he starts getting maybe a mild fever or maybe throat. That is the time when you think of a secondary infection and put him on some oral antibiotic, and majority of them settle. As far as the stay in ICU is concerned, they are the people who usually get Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah, that is what. See, the thing is, OPD level, the secondary infections are very less. Okay, here and there, we have seen few cases of bacterial sinusitis, and they have been, they have been treated with oral antibiotics, and most of them have settled. As far as the ICU patients are concerned, definitely there is, increased incidence of secondary bacterial infections post 2 weeks of let's say, or their illness. Okay, post 2 weeks of their illness, majority of them grow their the ICU colonized bacteria. That is Klebsiella and all those things. They are the ones who have been a bit challenging for us to treat. I want to hear from other panelists as well. I think the physician himself. I think what their take and as well as your take on that, Dr. Bhagesh.
Yeah, so regarding infections, hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Shashi, we can hear you.
Yeah, sir, from my side, as outpatient, as you said, the secondary infections are negligible, were treated with mild disease. Moderate to severe in hospitals, we had patients with there are some number, but they all had a comorbids, something like diabetes with complications. And only 2 young people had secondary infections. Unexplained, source unexplained, but their Procalc was positive, counts high. Other than during the post-COVID period, what we are seeing now is the mucormycosis one. The other 2 cases we had, and we have lost, is the cavitary fungal pneumonia. One patient had a mucor, the other patient had both aspergillus as well as the mucor. Hello? Other than that, to the amount what we use immunosuppression, surprisingly, the incidence of bacterial infections are less.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, with this.
Okay, that's a good thing. Otherwise, it would have been more trouble if to the extent what we use immunosuppression. Hello?
Bhageshri, you have to unmute, Bhageshri.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Yes.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, I would like in the chat box there are a few questions, so I'll go ahead with those questions. The cancer patients, when they can start with their surgeries.
A lot of interruption, Bhageshi. You have to repeat the question. Hello?
The cancer patients who are
Yeah.
post-COVID positive, post-COVID, when they can start their chemotherapy or go for an elective surgery?
See, depends upon what I feel. It depends upon the indication and the status of the lung condition and the severity of the disease. Okay. They determine rather than the COVID per se. COVID per se, I feel it is only the thrombotic complications which will come across in the post-COVID period, increased risk during any surgeries. Other than that, it is the patient's condition which determines when to go for those things. So if you look at time,
Yeah, I would,
at least 4 to 6 weeks later, they can plan for any elective surgeries. Minimum of 4 weeks, ideal 6 weeks later. With a good
definitely, I
anticoagulation.
agree with
Okay, the chemotherapy.
With a good thromboprophylaxis.
Okay. Patients who are completely recovered still have D-dimer levels high. What do you attribute it, and should they about it? When the repeat follow-up with those D-dimers levels?
See, I feel following up with the D-dimer, I don't think any studies will suggest that. So even for the anticoagulation,
Okay.
D-dimer is just a marker of the severity rather than an indication to give anticoagulation. Because it can be raised in any inflammatory conditions. Other thing what I have observed is, particularly in females, during menstrual cycles, all those things, the D-dimer will come. People do those tests by themselves to check for the D-dimer, come back with those things. That is one thing we should keep in mind. If the patient is clinically stable, I don't think we should do anything.
Dr.
I
Sandeep,
totally agree with it, because D-dimer is an acute phase reactant. Don't keep on repeating tests unless the patient is having some issue. There is no problem. Once they have recovered symptomatically, I think we should leave them to live their life in their own way. They want to live. As long as we go on repeating tests, some or the other thing will pop up, and we don't know what to do with that.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay.
And their markers are unnecessarily high. We don't know. That is what. There is no treatment to give for all those things. I think we should stop investigating a patient who is completely recovered.
So what is other thing happening, sir? It is increasing the anxiety among the people.
That is what.
Okay.
That is what.
So the labs are promoting too much investigations, leading to more anxiety.
Yeah. See, that is what. See, I think we should stop the investigating a person once he is discharged. The only thing what we have to look for is his symptoms and the oxygen saturation. Once that saturation comes back to normal, I think we should stop asking him to come to follow up also, is what I feel as a pulmonologist dealing with this COVID.
The question is, next question to Dr. Maheshwarappa. And Ayurvedic medications in post-COVID issues.
Pardon? Can you repeat? Bhageshri, can you repeat? I could not hear.
Sir, Ayurvedic medicines in post-COVID state.
Hello.
I really don't know.
Yoga, sir, your role of yoga.
Yoga is the one what we have in our rehab team. One of the team member is a yoga person who is highly qualified, and we left and right use him from the beginning of the COVID. The moment patient comes out from the ICU to the ward, even with 15 of oxygen, we tell them to start the yoga. Reason, because the patient don't know how to breath hold, and they have a very short breath, and the moment we tell them to do deep breathing exercise, they start coughing, and it just they start coughing. So they don't know how to breath control, how to take slow, smooth breathe in and breathe out.
Correct.
From there, really they start, and they do with the yoga is definitely it is applicable, and it's a scientific lot of evidence on that, especially in the pulmonary rehab. Definitely it will help.
It makes a huge difference.
Yes, that's true.
Sir, autonomic dysfunction while doing the rehabilitation in post-COVID issues, have you come across any autonomic dysfunction issues?
See, we have not seen whatever we we thought probably the patient may be having autonomic hyperreflexia or autonomic imbalance, dysfunction. But this anxiety, severe anxiety in patient, they have tachycardia, tachypnea, and sweating, and dryness of mouth because of anxiety. And when you
Okay.
make them to stand on the tilt table, but
Okay.
blood pressure was almost it goes up to 180, and that was looking more of anxiety related sympathetic, more of rather than a real autonomic dysfunction, which I have not seen. And every
Okay.
patient who comes to with severely damaged lungs, they feel that the moment
Mhm.
they do CT scan, they say that you have already lung involvement, and patient thinks that is the first thing in his mind. That's how much anxiety they have. He thinks that he's going to die. So that is their back of his mind. So from there, as they recover, functionality and
Mhm.
oxygen saturation and strength and improvement, all these things definitely gradually the anxiety comes down and they do well. So, but I really didn't see any of the patients with autonomic dysfunction, because we have autonomic lab with we do tilt table in the beginning when patient is bedridden for a long time. We take them on tilt table, slowly over,
Okay. Okay.
gradually make them to stand.
But one observation is
Okay.
the
Okay.
tachycardia. What I have observed is the tachycardia in some group of people, it will be out of proportion to their anxiety. Even during the follow-up, we see their heart rates will be somewhere around 130, 140. Some people goes to 160, but they are not tachypneic, they look calm. Is it one sign of autonomic dysfunction?
Only tachycardia without.
And some people say some giddiness. Anyway, we have not used tilt table testing, but significant 140, 150, 160 at times it goes, even during follow-up.
Severely affected lungs, we see always above 120 only. Even at resting time, heart rate will be high, above
Right.
110, 120, even at resting time. Probably that's a compensatory. The heart rate probably compensating during the rest, and when you put them into physical task, probably it goes up very high. But even the monitor, looking at the monitor, they become heart rate goes up,
Man,
the saturation, the
I
sensors
think that is,
started working.
we should turn away the monitors away from their
yeah,
heads.
yeah, yeah. I think nowadays patients are seeing more monitors than the doctors.
That is true.
Doctors and yes.
Even the family started looking at the monitor and they become taking
Yeah.
cardiac.
Sir, you have a protocol to wean off the patient who are on oxygen concentrators or any this thing, the oxygen dependent on BiPAP. Do such patients come to your the rehab centers?
Yes, that is true. Most of our patients are on BiPAP initially. We don't really
Okay.
put them into intensive rehab. The moment they are out from BiPAP machine, then we
Okay.
take them to, even with high concentration, we start mobilizing on wheelchair,
Okay.
making them tilt stand, tiltable, and we have
Okay.
robotic assisted slow cycle. We put them there, and it doesn't exert them; it does a passive movement,
Okay.
and like that we slowly progress.
Okay.
With
Okay.
a comprehensive approach, if you give from yoga to occupational therapists are the one they
Mm-hmm.
design activity without making patient to fatigue. And
Okay.
minimal strength of the body, they can do some of the activities. So, so it's a more of comprehensive approach. With that, yoga, physiotherapy, and gradually building up more respiratory muscle strength and adding up
Okay.
parametry to and power breathe, and then pulling out from high oxygen and tapering off. As I said, most of our patients with rehab they recovered, and without oxygen they went. So I think, see, the problem is in our country, how many pulmonologists we have in the country to treat these patients, and when it comes to rehab, we have almost, we can say, zero.
Okay.
we need to have the rehab is a multidisciplinary. We have a cardiac rehab, we have pulmonary rehab, we have the neuro rehab, orthopedic sports. But where are the professions? These are all written only in the books. When we read our MD, it's a complete entire refi. What is like a general medicine out 3 years degree. It's a rehab medicine is a 3 years degree, and its application in all the sector, and very few people doctors are there, and who set up a rehab, the highest quality rehab with a team of professionals, rehab professionals. They all only studied the rehab part.
Okay.
So so suppose a patient, if you look at our hospital, we have a comprehensive, but how do we manage when patient goes to reach the village? He has to go to remote village. We need to have set up something like a tele-rehabilitation and show them through tele-rehabilitation to the mobile that simple exercise. Say, what are the breathing exercise? Like, like blowing the balloons and blowing the candlelight and blowing the, in the village and all, they used to use the pipe to breathe. And so we tell them to do those exercise with that. And also, when it comes to physical exercise, we tell them to use the bottles, water bottles to do exercise and some of the yoga. So online we try to reach, but it is not very effective, but we have to give it to society.
Okay, sir. Okay, Dr. Shishi and Dr. Sandeep, what is the role of antifibrinolytics in the COVID patient for to prevent the pulmonary fibrosis? A lot of them are put on antifibrinolytics.
And antifibrotics.
Fibrotic agents, yeah, antifibrotic agents.
See, personally speaking, I have not written a single antifibrotic to any of my patients.
Okay, do you think any role is there? They play any role to prevent the pulmonary fibrosis?
That is what. See, we have not seen any fibrosis in any patient. The patient is not turned to us with what say long-term requirement of oxygen. Definitely fibrosis will be there. In TB also there is fibrosis. There are so many people who are living with a single lung, where one lung, entire lung is destroyed with fibrosis. Okay. See, fibrosis in interstitial lung disease is a different process. Fibrosis in COVID is a different process. COVID is a single time injury. Interstitial lung disease is an ongoing injury. So a single time injury doesn't deserve any kind of antifibrotics, because wherever there is an injury, that will heal with the fibrosis, and that will the remaining lung will definitely compensate for the loss of volume, whatever we have had. The same thing happens with the destroyed lung on the left side. The entire right lung starts hyperinflating and it starts passing through the mediastinum into the left side as well. So I personally feel, I think the data, I think there are some papers here and there, and the study, the duration of studies, the quality of studies, if we go dig deeper into them, I don't find any evidence, solid evidence to start somebody on antifibrotics at the time of discharge.
Okay.
If you ask me personally, I have not written a single prescription of pirfenidone or nintedanib to any of my patients, and most of them are doing very well.
Shashi, your experience?
Yeah, as sir said, definitely the quality of evidence is not that great. Those people who are going with the oxygen, we are using it. We are using at 100 milligrams twice daily nintedanib. If they tolerate, we are going up to 150 milligrams. We are using almost for 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks we are using, depending on the patient's need for oxygenation.
Okay.
And definitely, as sir said, once there is an injury, post, they will heal, whether they will heal in an abnormal way or normal way. So I don't think the drugs will help to, endothelial, those functions will improve. So the quality of evidence needs to be good to say accurately, but we are using it.
Okay. We have cardiologist in our group in this, Dr. Pradeep. I would like to ask few cardiac questions to him. Dr. Vasu, can you unmute Dr. Pradeep?
Bhagya, he was there, but now he's not seen. Probably he's left or maybe, yeah. If he joins back, I'll
once we.
Yeah, okay. What is the panelist advice for the patients in the rural setup? Dr. Sandeep, you have just finished few of your rural camps and coming back. So what is your advice with the limited support and the limited resources we have? How do we take care of those
Hello?
rural patients, and what is your experience with that? Dr. Sandeep?
Yeah, Bhagesh, can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
No, with the limited support and resources, what is your advice in a rural setup? How do we help the patients in the rural setup? They don't have pulse ox, everything goes by the clinical
That
distance.
is what we have been on from past 2 weeks. Every weekend for a period of 2 days, we are spending our time in rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what we have understood is
Mm-hmm.
definitely, as you told, the resources are limited. If we have a proper scientific approach of
Mm-hmm.
not relying too much upon this RT-PCR and all those things, pulse oximeters are more or less available with majority of the ASHA workers. That is what we have understood. That is what we learned after we visited those rural areas.
Okay.
So the resources are not as limited as we think as compared to the city. As far as
Okay.
the management of COVID is concerned, most of them are equipped with pulse oximeters. There are definitely COVID care centers which are set up at different taluk levels as well as the Hobli levels. Okay, the only thing at village level, what we have to consider and what we have to make up for is the awareness regarding the disease. There is a lot of stigma which is associated with COVID in the rural areas. There are some incidences where there are people who have hit the COVID patients with stone pelting. Stone pelting has been done, it seems. So apart from that, as far as the monitoring things are concerned, as far as the care is concerned, I think rural areas are also more or less equipped to handle the cases, but definitely they will not be as good as this, as sir said. No, Dr. Maheshwarappa. See, the rehabilitation is something which has to reach to the periphery. See, giving steroid and giving basic medications should not be a problem, even at the rural areas. But reaching these specialty services like this rehabilitation and all those things might be a challenge. I think we all have to work towards overcoming them. Maybe a training session for the peripheral doctors or something like that we can do.
Okay, and my one more question to both of you regarding the anticoagulation prophylaxis, what we are putting to the patients on discharge. The Xarelto or Apixaban or whatever, you are putting for 6 weeks, or is it for 3 months?
1 month, 4 weeks, 4 weeks.
So because we are seeing post-COVID issues, post-COVID strokes, don't you think it is advisable to continue it for a little longer than what is? And even mucormycosis, what we are seeing now, the basic pathology is thrombosis. Don't you think extending the anticoagulation over a period of 3 months is more helpful?
Yeah, again, that is, risk-benefit analysis is something what we have to do. I think, I don't know. I think till now we have been using it for 4 weeks and none of them have turned up with any kind of post-COVID complication, thrombotic complications. Yes, we have seen patients coming after 1 or 2 cases with superior mesenteric artery ischemia and all those things. I think this is a welcome thing. I think we should look for more robust evidence, and the cardiologist, I think they are the ones. I think Dr. Pradeep can add more to this.
Okay, Dr. Shashi, you're putting for 4 to 6 weeks or longer term?
Yeah, see, no, my practice wise, I use based whether a patient is mild, moderate, or severe disease and the risk of having a thrombosis or complications. Generally, we are not hypoxic, the markers are normal, we are not using. Okay. Those there are risk factors. Those who are hypoxic, immobilized, those things we are continuing. Okay. The duration depends upon how well he recovers. Follow-up is mild cases, we are not asking them to come. See, 1 week and 3rd or 4th week, we decide whether to continue or not to continue. Based on their mobility, those things, risk factors.
So you're calling for follow-up for after how many weeks?
Yeah, it depends on patients who are diabetic, who are on insulin. This thing we ask them to call after a week. who
Okay.
are on oxygen, those things who are able to come. Otherwise,
Mhm.
comfortable, moderate cases, minimal oxygen, we ask them to come back after 3 to 4 weeks. Okay.
So why,
Based on
yeah.
in the mucor, what I feel is mucor itself invades the vessels and causes thrombosis rather than COVID per se increasing the risk of thrombosis there.
Okay. No, that's what all this, whatever
Because
post-COVID issues we are
mucormycosis
seeing.
characteristic itself is it invades the vessels, thrombosis causes necrosis. But there, whether the thromboprophylaxis is really helpful.
No, because a lot of post-COVID issues like chronic fatigue syndrome, they're attributing to the myocardial injury also.
Yeah.
Then
Then
again, that is microvascular clot sitting there, and they have seen MRI heart they have done, and they have seen that there is EFS come down in a lot of patients who come with chronic fatigue syndrome, and the pathology they are telling is the microvascular thrombosis. And again, what we are seeing strokes or all basically it's major COVID. This thing is thrombotic pathology. So whether extending an anticoagulation for 3 months is going to be helpful.
The other thing is okay. Microvascular thrombosis, is it more of a platelet or it's a red clot?
Okay.
So that is also matters. So it's difficult to decide as per the guidelines. If you look at the literature wise, so I feel unless there are risk factors, there's no recommendation as such to give. You are categorizing the patient size mild, moderate, severe. Mild, there's no recommendation at all unless there are risk factors. Moderate and severe, there are risk factors where the hypoxia, all those things continue at least 4 weeks. Next extension, depending upon the patient's condition, we can decide.
So you still feel
So
post-COVID issues are going to be with the depending upon the severity of the COVID what they had?
No. That means it can vary. Even mild patients can have a chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay, who are not even hospitalized, treated at home, they can have a chronic fatigue syndrome. Even cardiac symptoms, as you said, they can have a myocardial dysfunction. We have seen some people coming with bradycardia, heart rates going up to 36, 34, like what it used to happen in dengue. They are all, I feel, they're all subclinical myocarditis.
Okay.
If we do, as you said, MRI, we will going to pick up all those things. But they are all over a period of time.
Okay.
As I said, the fatigue, if the patient comes after 4 weeks with a fatigue, if heart rate normal, BP normal, then I don't think that myocardial injury will be the cause for the fatigue syndrome. They will have symptoms like tachycardia or some conduction disturbances, something.
Okay.
Or otherwise, we don't know, it might invade the vessels and some findings might be there in every patient. We do MRI.
Okay. Are you advising the MRIs hard for the patients?
No, unless they are symptomatic, we are not advising. Who has echo evidence? Who has echo evidence of LV dysfunction or anything symptomatic? No, we are not advising.
Okay.
Maybe as an investigational, we can do.
Okay. One of the question is, if these patients get chest discomfort, pain, when is the best time to investigate them with to a TMT, 2D echo? And these may not be possible to do if they have breathlessness like TMT. How do we differentiate these from non-cardiac causes?
Yeah, see again, we have to look at the pattern of their chest pain, what is the stage of or grade of effort dyspnea, what the ECG shows, echo shows, the cardiac marker shows. Okay, if they don't have any risk factors, the effort dyspnea, what you are feeling fatigue could be due to the chronic fatigue syndrome rather than myocardial itself.
Okay.
So if their cases, if no evidence, MRI, I really doubtful. Otherwise, we can recommend if they are affordable.
Okay. Sir, Dr. Maheshwarappa, anything else you would like to add in the rehab this thing?
Yeah. I think everywhere it's a requirement. The specialty which is lacking is rehabilitation, and we may have to strengthen as a whole by the government and the private colleges, medical colleges, and community, and the doctors as a specialty. Many of the doctors they're not aware of the rehabilitation. So
okay,
when it comes to the specialty oriented rehabilitation, I think that is what we are lacking. And second, some of the patients are having a speech problem, difficulty in speaking, and also difficulty in swallowing. Those are these patients do have this. So that could be because of the lot of that they breathe from the mouth, and they develop a lot of ulceration and also fungal infection because of immunosuppression.
Yes, yes.
And also they have
Yes.
muscular weakness of the larynx, pharyngeal muscles, pharyngolarynx. So they end up with, because of weakness, they have a difficulty swallowing. And some patients cough so much, and they develop even the vocal cord tear. And there we need to make them voice rest and then uh, work on the dysphagia. This is where our speech and swallowing therapists work on. And clinical psychologists, we utilize them maximum because these patients have stress and anxiety and depression, uh, and also some of the patients, you must be knowing that suicidal tendencies. So we, as a team, we use them as a clinical psychologist, and the the year we need to counsel the family members and the relatives regarding the further care and long-term rehabilitation program, home-based. So this is very essential further to improve the quality of life. And we all, the multiple, from the pulmonologists to psychiatrists, rehab doctors, and physios, combinedly when we work, we can get a excellent quality of life, and the patient will remember forever the doctors.
Okay. Can we take the questions from the audience?
Rakesh, one more small interruption here.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
we are
tell
not
me.
covering post-COVID mainly the mental disorders. See, what I feel is all ICU patients, especially who go on HFNC or this thing's prolonged stay, they have a lot of anxiety disorder,
Yeah.
depression, post-immunity. I think all ICU patients should get involved with one psychiatrist also. They need one
Yeah.
psychiatric counseling, not only
Yeah.
in the hospital, even during the follow-up. They should go on for
Yeah.
almost a few months, I feel, 3 to 6
Definitely.
months. The fear they have, as such, COVID word itself is causing fear. On top of that, having on a ventilator, NIV with so much pressures, these things, and that should include even the family members. Okay, wherever we feel, I think this should be recommended for all the people. The psychiatrist involvement, as sir said, clinical psychologist.
Yes. Counseling is matters a lot. Than psychiatrist,
especially with the ICU
counseling
patient.
part. Yeah, we wanted to have a psychiatrist and a psychologist on the panel today, but then we thought keep the panelists to the minimum. This thing. That's the reason we didn't have the psychologist and the psychiatrist in the
I think
today's discussion.
That can be a separate topic as itself.
Separate topic itself. Yes. Can we take questions from the audience? Whoever wants to ask, please raise your hands. Okay. One of the question, Shashi, is multivitamins, vitamin D are being used by everyone. How long might the duration of requirement of these drugs should be done in India? Won't it be an overdose?
Definitely. Maybe. Definitely all are, I think, abused to the maximum extent in India. All drugs which are given before 5 days, other than paracetamol. Okay, there is no clear-cut evidence on that. Maybe during the people who are admitted, people who are having a weakness, as you said, fatigue syndrome, these things, and the older age people, the supplementation with the vitamin D might be helpful. Especially people with, as you said last time, sarcopenia, muscle weakness, vitamin D will be helpful. Other than that, it is more of a placebo effect. A good nutritional diet should be adequate.
Okay. Dr. Seema is this thing. Vasu, can you unmute her? She has a question.
She's unmuted here. People
yeah,
can
Seema, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Bhagya. Dr. Shashi, this question is for you. I'm an outpatient family physician. Here, a lot of patients have, loss of taste and smell for, many months. Few of them recover, 6-8 weeks, but many of them months on end have either, complete loss or, abnormal sensations with taste and smell. Have you developed any sort of, protocol to treat such patients? Because it's hard to get everybody into a ENT specialist just for this. Have you, developed any, treatment protocol for such patients?
No, I think in this for alpha, this thing, the smell and these two, there's no specific drug unless identified with vitamin B12. If they are normal, we should refer to the rehab things where they train that olfactory or gustatory training. But as of now, we are reassuring and giving a supplements. Other than that, we are not doing anything.
Okay. Yeah.
What about one more person has asked a question, Shashi? Sorry, Seema, are you done or sorry to interrupt?
So, no, there was here.
No pharmacological drug which will help in this smell or this thing taste. So it's only the gustatory or olfactory training by a rehab should help. Okay. Because as sir said already, the availability of rehab people is very less and we are also overloaded. We are just giving a supplements and reassuring over time it will improve. Generally what we are seeing is people with hyposmia and males, generally they do well. Total anosmia, females, I think they are taking longer period.
Okay.
And long-term
So
follow-up.
Dr. Maheshwarappa, your experience with the?
Actually, we have very, very few patients which they had any loss of smell. But my advice is the one way of re-education and retraining the taste buds, what we use for coma patients. I don't know whether we have not tried here. So where we use different for swallowing. This is a retraining. The loss of the retraining for the taste, like they use all the salt and then sweet and vinegar. These things probably train them to get the taste back, and also smell. We use different smell to stimulate the patient in coma. I don't know whether that can be applied, but to be frank, I do not know. And we tell them if there is a sensation, and make sure you will not get burnt, and make sure you use bland food and take care of your oral hygiene and multivitamins.
Okay. Dr. Seema?
Yes, thank you. That's pretty much what we have been using here, just, olfactory retraining with different smells, ask them to, smell fragrances, lemon, rose, or other ones that they could use multiple times a day to kind of retrain. There was some evidence of using, intranasal steroids to help. But again, it is so risky to use unnecessary steroids right now at this situation. So I'm trying only if there is necessity, I use those, but mainly retraining with the smells I have done. I have not done any, I don't have any retraining experience that I do with taste so far. I have not done that, but that's a good idea to maybe consider speech therapy folks to say if it is very severe, if it is not, and if it is self, resolving, we don't do anything either. I was just asking because some patients seem to have loss for longer, like 6 months plus, only then I intervene. Thank you so much.
Some patients are complaining of burning sensation on the tongue. Any of you have encountered those complaints in the post-COVID patients, and how do we go about it? Just a symptomatic treatment or?
See, it's any post-infectious people complain on that one. Likely will be nutritional. Just other thing will be because of steroids and by the same rotacaps, they are using candid mouth pain whenever there is a suspicion of fungal infection.
Okay.
So glossitis will be the likely. Supplements with whenever there is a suspicion for candida, we use candid mouth paint. That's all we're doing as of now. Other than that, for pain relief, we're giving local anesthetic.
Symptomatic treatment.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. Umesh, your question?
I just want to make an observation regarding the cardiac problems in post-COVID patients. there was a question as to when a person can start exercising or doing a workout. So just wanted to respond to that. So they have looked at the outcomes in. They're still recruiting patients to the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association in the US, and they're looking at the cardiac problems in these athletes and when they can get back onto the field. So, so their advice is that patients, the athletes who had been admitted, who had required admission for COVID, these people should undergo a formal total cardiac evaluation before they can go back onto the field. And those who had mild or asymptomatic disease, if they have definite cardiac symptoms like chest pain, palpitations, shortness of breath and exertion, orthopnea, or syncope, so these are the ones who should undergo a complete evaluation before getting back on the field. Those mild and asymptomatic ones who did not require admission and who did not require, who do not have cardiac symptoms can get back to their workout or gym or whatever they want to do.
Okay, it's basically clear symptomatically how they feel.
Yeah, symptomatically how they feel for those who had mild or asymptomatic disease, COVID.
Okay.
Those who have had moderate or severe disease requiring admission, even if they do not have any cardiac symptoms, and if they want to get back to competitive exercise or competitive sports, they should undergo a cardiac evaluation before they do so.
Okay. Mr. Anirudh, you can ask your question. Are you there?
Yes. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Bhagrashri. Yeah. In fact, I'm a dental surgeon, and I came across a lot of cases where patients had atrophic candidiasis after the first wave. We see inside the oral cavity, which is very common these days, and especially if they're chronic asthmatic patients, they tend to have the puffs very often because they're scared of the respiratory condition that could possibly affect them. What would the panel suggest as a treatment plan for, or a protocol rather, for patients like this? I mean, do we need to evaluate through a consent from an ENT surgeon or a dermatologist before we go ahead with oral procedures? Because most of our procedures involve either lacerating the oral cavity or probably aerosol involvement and so on and so forth. So what would the panel suggest? And I mean, I would want to know about that.
Okay, Dr. Sandeep, Dr. Shashi.
No, from my side, so it's the patient general condition what determines. If the lung, as you are saying, asthma, if there is no asthma and the patient's lung involvement is very much less, I think you can do as a routine whenever you plan. If there is a lung involvement and the patient lung condition should be stabilized, and then you can do it, where during that process the need for the dose of steroids should be quite high. The risk of having worsening atrophic candidiasis might be high. So if there is a possibility to postpone, maybe short period of postponement. It all depends on the patient condition, I feel.
Okay. Dr. Maheshwarappa, my doubt regarding the post-COVID patients who are back home after 4 weeks, who are on oxygen concentrators, what they're finding difficulties is nebulization because they are at home with a nurse. So when they are not able to disconnect the BiPAP, how long should they be on the budesonide inhalers or nebulizers? Because they can't take an inhaler because their FRC is very poor. So what is your advice on that? How do you go? What is your protocol with the nebulizations? How long do you go ahead with the nebulizations?
Giving the nebulization with the steroid, I don't know. Pulmonologist has to comment on this. But now, like a bronchodilator, if there is a secretion, bronchodilators with the mucolytics nebulization will help to remove the secretion. So that it depends on the patient condition. If it's a dry cough, we need to suppress the cough. If there is a thick secretion, make it more mucolytic and then remove the secretion and then work on the exercise. But all these patients with continuous rehab program, even at home, they can come out from oxygen concentrator. It can be weaned off.
Okay. 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 Dr. Sandeep, you are there? I think he is traveling and I think there might be a signal issue.
Yeah, Dr. Sandeep is not
Any
there,
more
but Dr.
questions?
Pradeep has come back.
Okay, Dr. Pradeep? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Dr. Pradeep, few questions.
Yeah.
Your experience with myocardial infarctions in COVID patients. That's the first thing. And I have 3 questions. I'll finish that.
Yeah.
You can answer. Yeah, first is your experience with the myocardial infarction in the COVID patients, acute COVID phase and in post-COVID, like after 4 weeks of COVID positive. Secondly, with the post-COVID patients, have you seen myocarditis related to the chronic fatigue syndrome? Have you done any follow-up echoes for that? And third question is, any latest evidence of the risk of DVT and pulmonary embolism with the COVID patients?
Yeah, for the first question, Bhagya, actually what I've seen, or in our center, what we've seen is, especially in the last month, we had almost 10 or 12 patients where we've done a primary angioplasty, and some of them are already admitted for COVID, moderate disease, developed chest pain, developed ST elevation, then taken up for an angiogram and then subsequently an angioplasty. Most of them were thrombotic. The thing is, there's not much of a stenosis as such, like more clots in most of these patients, and there's a very young patients coming with this problem. There's a 32-year-old guy who suddenly came with an inferior wall MI, and around half of these patients were incidentally detected to be COVID. They were asymptomatic for COVID, but they came, we did the angioplasty, and then only then subsequently realized that they were COVID positive. So there is definitely an increase. This wasn't so common in the previous wave. In this particular wave, the number of people coming with acute coronary syndromes are quite high. This is in the acute phase. I've really not come across too many people in the convalescent period, or maybe after a few weeks. We've really not had too many people with acute coronary syndromes. More of DVT, pulmonary embolism. We had one young man who came almost after 2 to 4 weeks. Again, we don't know whether he had an underlying thrombotic tendency. That we don't know. We have to test and see, because now we can't attribute everything to COVID. Even before COVID, we used to get young people coming with MIs with DVT, with pulmonary embolism. So probably it requires a little more of a study. Your second question about myocarditis.
Yeah,
I really haven't seen anybody with myocarditis, at least in our practice. We have a reasonably a large number of patients with COVID in our hospital also, but hardly any with myocarditis. We had 2 children with MICS who came back after. They didn't come with children. One was a 14-year-old boy, another 8-year-old boy. They were not diagnosed as COVID positive, only then the antibodies are positive, but parents were treated for mild disease previously. IgG and symptomatic, whatever steroids, whatever the pediatrician gave them, within 3 to 4 days they'll be at almost normalized. So there's an acute benefit with IgG with these children with MICS. As such, myocarditis we are not seeing too much in COVID.
Any follow-up echoes in the patients who are staying beyond 4 weeks in your ICUs or in the ward? Have you seen any decrease in the EF or anything at the resting echo?
Not really. These things are, most of it, I'm not handling the patients directly. It's our intensivist and the pulmonologist. So I think, but still we've not seen any reduced ejection fraction. There have been 1 or 2 cases where the MI has happened and nobody knew about it. Now, patient on follow-up, we realize that they've got some wall motion abnormality. on follow-up, so that maybe they might have, we really don't know the date of the MI because troponin is already low.
Okay.
So must have
okay.
been, that's on follow-up. We've had 2-3 patients now who come back post-COVID after almost a month or so.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Pradeep. And one of the audience is telling that in US, Canada, and Israel, they are seeing the myocarditis associated with vaccination actually than the COVID per se, especially post Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. They are seeing myocarditis. It seems.
Correct.
Okay, and one more question.
Post-vaccination, quite a few MIs have come. Quite a few MIs post-vaccination. Now, again, we don't know whether it is because of vaccine or not.
No.
Even yesterday,
Okay.
we had a 38-year-old guy, otherwise absolutely normal, LAD occluded, fully thrombotic. He'd had his vaccine 1 week ago. Otherwise, no comorbidities, no smoker. I mean, not a smoker, no diabetes, hypertension, no family history. Only thing, he came with an acute MI. Only problem he says is he took vaccination 1 week ago.
Okay. And what is the target saturation you try to achieve in COPD or asthmatic patients, Dr. Maheshwarappa?
In COPD?
COPD and asthmatic patients, the target saturation levels
in
your
COVID?
rehab with the COVID, post-COVID, yeah. Hello?
The question I didn't understand.
Sir, what is the
Yes,
yeah, sir, the question is, what is the target level of saturation on a pulse oximeter in a patients with COPD or in asthma patients with the COVID situation, with COVID infection?
When you are weaning a patient from BiPAP or oxygen dependency, what will be your target saturations with COPD and asthmatic patients, sir?
See, the moment they come down from we don't take them to rehab until the patient comes out from BiPAP machine. When they are on high concentration, even with the NIV mask, 15 liter, in the bedside only we try to increase the level of activity with oxygen. Monitoring. Once the saturation, once the mask is gone, NIV mask, and the saturation level comes down to the level of 6 to 8 liter, then we take them to the rehab where they do stand and walk and cycle and those things. But that is also with when patients say, suppose patient with 8 to 10 liter of oxygen, but when during the therapy we give it at 15 liter. 15. So, but to mobilize to the rehab, we need at least about 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 liter. We target. If patient is stable with the 10 liter, we take them. If patient is not stable with the 6 to 8 liter also, then we don't take. So
basically, clinically, how the patient is.
6 to 8 liters should be there. We target to mobilize him to the active rehabilitation.
No. So the question is, when you use 6 to 8 liters, what is the expected saturation level? You want the saturation to do 92 and above, or 88? Above 90.
94.
Yeah, that's what. So I think it should be above 90.
Okay.
Yes, above 90.
For rehab.
Okay.
But for a comfort zone, I think 88 should be also acceptable.
Yeah, but
when the pulmonologist has to add.
What happens, these patients, even when they speak, the saturation goes down.
Yeah.
Even when they speak continuously. So when put them into physical task, then really they go down. We have to keep them high concentration during the treatment therapy.
Okay. 1 second, sir. Just there was one of them asking which vaccine is preferred. Shashi, which vaccine is preferred? One of the.
See, the present situation, whatever the people get, let them take. Okay. Anyone is fine according to me.
Okay.
Covishield or Covaxin.
Okay.
So all people come and ask the same
Dr.
question.
Murli,
But as
you
far
are
as
there?
now, as of
Okay. Dr. Murli, you are there? Also, can you unmute Dr. Murlidhar TR?
Sure.
Yeah. Hello. Hello, Dr. Murli.
Hello.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah. Tell me, Bhagesh.
Yeah, this is Dr. Murli, intensivist at the Kaveri Hospital. He was in the first wave. He was at Apollo Jayanagar and treated thousands of patients, of COVID patients. So, sir, your experience with the post-COVID issues, as you are seeing the post-COVID patients also, your experience with them.
Specifically anything, Bhagesh, or it's a general?
The post-COVID issues, sir. What all oxygen dependency, with what all complaints they come back to you, mainly when it respiratory this.
Compared to first wave, this wave is entirely different. As panelists were been discussing,
Yeah.
one is the mutant strain and the severity and the younger generation. Definitely,
Okay.
very horrible. Plus, last time we had a good results compared to whatever available treatments. This time really challenging. In the severe patients, we don't see much response. Definitely good care,
Okay.
appropriate decision. Critically, definitely intubation is always a challenge. There is still a lot of dilemma when to intubate, how long when to extubate. Definitely there is a myth is that intubation outcome is bad. But what we have seen is early or a clear indication needed, please intubate. Good care, definitely prone. Other measures, we are able to extubate few patients. Again, there was a challenge whether tracheostomy delayed and other things, but we have seen many patients without tracheostomy we were able to extubate. Again, we have not seen much infection second stage, because probably two or three observations. One is we are seeing a lot of young patients affecting this time who are very critical. No comorbidities. So that is the reason why you are not seeing secondary infection. First infection, elderly people, a lot of secondary infection after a few days on the ventilator. Probably that is also making mild changes in the outcomes here. Otherwise, a lot of things has been discussed. We have also seen a lot of thrombus, post-vaccine thrombus. We couldn't directly relate to vaccine, or it's just a coincidental observation. People went much, majority recovered. Went to, they were in shock, ARDS, but outcomes were absolutely good in them. Vaccine definitely has played a lot of role this time, because whatever we had about 300 or 400 ICU patients, but what we see is less per word 2 doses of vaccine who have been critical. Otherwise,
yes,
other observation is last time we saw a lot of DVTs. This time compared to less, whether it's disease understanding and aggressively treating, or the incident per se is less.
Now, the patients who are discharged, do they call you up with any post-COVID issues? Your experience with that?
Yes, a lot of chronic fatigue syndrome is most common. Chest pain, shortness of breath. These are the most common. That's what we have. Recent data also this has come. Last time when first we had anticoagulation for 3 months in high risk or a suspicious patient. But this time they're telling at least you moderate to severe, please give for 6 weeks minimum. That study has shown thing is that 6 weeks you treat, it has reduced stroke MI in 50% of patients, which is quite a good number. I think that we have to be aggressive on that. Proper monitoring and what I see is personally 10 to 15 days will be crucial post discharge. So please you have to have a close follow up with them.
10 to 15 days.
Yeah, 10 to 15 days.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, go.
No, go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I think 6 weeks is reasonably okay. I think we have to target 6 weeks with the moderate to severe patients or high risk patients.
Okay. Any other questions? Sir, Dr. Murli, please go ahead.
Other thing is last time we had a good use of HFNC and BiPAP. This time, severe patients, absolutely both are not working. HFNC is gone. 2 reasons, whether disease severity or lack of oxygen and hospitals struggling to supply the oxygen. Second thing, even BiPAP. Aggressively, we are doing the BiPAP. We are not monitoring other things. Only we are seeing saturation and other things. 2 to 3 days, not improving on the BiPAP, please have your plan B ready. Otherwise, we'll lose a patient. And once you have 3-4 days or 5-6 days waiting on the BiPAP continuously, you have to just monitor the oral. It's a pathetic situation on the oral cavity. Just have a soft corner for intubation. 2-3 days is too long for any continuous BiPAP. Tachycardia, tachypnea, saturation not maintaining, monitor PO2. Definitely consider for intubation. They're coming out with the intubation and good care.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One question is there.
Huh?
One question. I think Sujata Par, one question. This is persisting regarding persisting hyperglycemia.
Post-COVID in non-diabetic patients.
Yes, non-diabetic patients.
Yeah.
So even I have seen few patients who are non-diabetic, started on steroids, developed GIDM, glucocorticoid induced DM. Even after stopping 2 weeks later, they persist to have hyperglycemia. This time, which we didn't see in the last time, maybe we have to see in the future course how they will respond, whether they become non-diabetic or they will continue to be diabetic.
Are they borderline? Is it a borderline diabetes? You know,
no, previous
they would have converted into a diabetic patient.
No, people who are totally normal, even their HbA1c is within normal range, developed hyperglycemia following a steroid. After stopping steroids, also some people are persisting. Maybe the numbers are very less. I've seen 3-4 people. Maybe need to see when they come for the second follow-up. Still, they persist to have hyperglycemia.
Okay. Okay.
Hello, Shishi.
Rupa, you have a question?
Yes, sir.
Shishi, you are right. It's like the same gestational diabetes.
Yeah.
Physiological variation happens. For a few percentage, again, they'll have a late onset diabetes.
Yeah, maybe some genetic risk factors.
Yeah, genetic risk factors will be there.
Right, yeah.
Here, two more to add to your discussion is whether diabetic on COVID steroid worsening or COVID per se causing issues with the pancreas and diabetics.
The beta cell injury.
Beta cell injury. That has also been
injury. Yes.
Yeah. Over the time, I think we'll know how things.
Other thing is unmasking the predisposed people.
Correct.
Like
Exactly. Yeah.
See, one more question. This thing, what is the dose you are using in this thing? DVT prophylaxis or in ICU patients or in general?
General, depending, it's most of the time is 40 BD or 60 BD.
60.
Clexane.
Okay.
Clexane.
Yeah.
If we follow closely with the PTA, PTT and platelets, sir, we have this time a lot of immune-mediated thrombocytopenias. Once start dropping, we change to fondaparin or
fondaparin. Yes, sir. Yeah, that is the only thing which we are discussing, whether it's autoimmune.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Autoimmune and lupus anticoagulation, those only two the autoimmune disorders we can conclude as of now.
Yes,
maybe
sir.
Time will go to answer.
Yes, sir. But severe two other differential, whether a DIC and TTP has to be.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been 90 minutes. We started this thing. Thank you very much, Dr. Maheshwarappa, Dr. Shashikumar. Dr. Sandeep is not there because of the travel. Dr. Pradeep, Dr. Murli, who has given a lot of inputs into the this webinar. Thank you very much. And our next webinar will be about mental health and COVID. Please do join us next Sunday, same time, 7:30.
And thank you, Bhagyashree. All the best. I couldn't get involved in our class this thing much because of our busy COVID work. Okay, all the best. Well done. Okay, congrats to you all, your team. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.